Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We're discussing national political news of the day, and well, my prediction came true, Dave. I switched from Shapiro to Waltz last week, and that'll be our first topic. I I was surprised, but not surprised when Harris made that decision. But it seemed like a lot was going on with him. He just heated up the airwaves with his television uh, um, appearances and the way he talks and the fact that he is so likable and apparently really did made good chemistry with Kamala Harris, which was very apparent in the Philadelphia rally yesterday. I haven't had the chance to see the Wisconsin rally or the Detroit rally, which I think is happening right now. Trump is annoyed that people are writing that she's getting bigger crowds than him. He really doesn't like that, and of course they're saying it's because of all the bands and musicians that she brings, just because he can't get anybody good, but except for Kid Rock. I mean, that's about it. Anyway, there's so much to talk about here, but I really do think that this was the best choice for her to make. And I'm going to start, and I'm going to turn it right over to you. But I want to start with, the analysis. Everybody thought it was going to be Shapiro. He had a little bit of baggage that we've discussed in the past, but while he could almost guarantee Pennsylvania for her, Waltz helps in all 50 states. Walz helps in all 50 states, and especially in the Rust Belt. He's a union man, but he's got that small town. I'm the father of the country kind of charm to him. I don't know if you had a chance to see some of his videos, like of when he and his daughter went to the country fair and had that discussion about vegetarianism and corn dogs, which is just hilarious. I mean, she's adorable herself, and then went on the slingshot ride. He has fun. I mean, but he also is really good at framing. He is probably his politics, while they were moderate when he was first in Congress, because he won in a very red district, he got to be governor. And he just went on a progressive tear, and we'll talk about some of those things that he did. But he basically is somebody who can sell progressive politics to middle America. That is a real charm, and he has successfully done that. Feeds kids in the schools. They call him a socialist for that. I can get into more, but I'm going to let you jump in here.
This is great. You actually reminded me, firstly, of course, that you predicted this change last week. But also, I covered this topic on my show on KMUD last week, which is called You Are Here. And I had the chair of the California Democratic Party Progressive Caucus on, and also our community's own, her name's Fatima, and Hélène Rouvier, who's our community's own Democratic vice chair of the Democratic Progressive Caucus for Northern California. Yeah, there you go. It's easy for me to say. But we covered this topic about there was a big push nationwide from progressives. They wrote a letter to Kamala Harris. 50 different people signed it, and they made their case about how Walz really could be somebody that motivates, inspires, builds the coalition, but also isn't off-putting or divisive to different other groups. Basically, that was their claim. So we talked about this. I did give you in other arena credit for making this switch, because while I did see the appeal of a Walz vice president, not just to Kamala Harris and her team, the Democratic Party, but nationwide. I mean, there's a lot to be said here. So we'll dive right in. But I think big picture, it's about not just his accomplishments in Minnesota, which we'll talk about, but also his delivery and what you said, the way he frames things. He is a highly effective speaker. not just in his motivation and inspiration, which we'll talk about his pedigree, his resume, but also in his criticisms. So he really is going to serve Vice President Harris well as the candidate. And I think the ticket itself, the best way to boil it down is one of his quotes from this speech yesterday. He talked about how, from his perspective, people respect their neighbors and the freedom to make personal choices, and that the golden rule is mind your own damn business.
Yes.
So he cuts across the traditional paradigm, and I think that that's a challenge for the critics and, of course, for Trump and Vance to figure out a way to tackle to counter this force, because he is a force now, and they are now a force. The momentum clearly in their favor. He even stated his message very clearly, which is that he practices the art of compromise without compromising his values. So I know if I could kind of sum it up here, and before I hand it back to you,
Sure.
It's, typically vice presidential choices have been, I guess the I don't know, the legend or the rule of thumb that hasn't been followed this entire century, since 2000. But still, people talk about how maybe you go to a battleground state, you go to a state that balances the ticket. In fact,
Right.
that hasn't been a practice for the recent past. But more importantly here, for the purpose of Walz, with respect to Walz, more than any single battleground state, the benefit will be that there is a transformative kind of aspirational aspect to him, and I think that that's what we're going to kind of get under the surface a little bit more here, and then as the campaign goes on.
There were mainstreamers that really wanted Shapiro or Kelly. Chris Matthews on MSNBC was really putting him down, saying, "Well, why don't we know about him? Why doesn't he have more of a national presence?" With it, he really wanted Kelly. Others really wanted it, but even he, after watching the Philadelphia rally, was on Morning Joe this morning and was just saying he was absolutely the right choice. I mean, it's just and the one-liners are going to again frame it. I mean, wanted to remind everybody that the crime rate was up under Trump, and that doesn't even include the crimes he committed. It was just, I mean, and that's a way that it's going to happen. But he also has a contrast that I think Harris is going to make that contrast too. It shows that she's willing to do it with Hillary Clinton, who made that comment about the basket of deplorables. Whereas he's saying, if people aren't voting for us, or if they're voting for the Trump or the Trump candidate, it means we're not clicking. Something's not clicking with us, and we need to focus on it rather than blame them. I mean, that's like the anti-deplorable situation, and I do believe, and this has also boosted Harris's confidence, because she's been out there doing really well. I mean, everybody on these panels have been complimenting her and her speeches, and they've got some great speechwriters. I mean, I'm sure they're involved in it themselves, but she's got a team now that I mean, it's got a team from everybody. She's like kept the Biden campaign and then added her own, and they just have been flawless since she's gone out. I mean, I can't really even point to a mistake that they've made really in the past couple of weeks, and they're creeping up in the polls. It's her approval rating's gone up. Biden's has gone up. It's just it affects the whole thing. Although I think his might have gone up partly just because he made the right choice. But it's they're trying right now. The Republicans are trying to figure out how they're going to attack this ticket. I mean, they've been trying Harris, identifying as one or the other of ethnicities. I mean, that's not going to fly. And they're trying to do a swift vote thing with him, saying that, he was in there for 24 years, but pulled out just as, months before they were going to be his unit was going to be deployed. What you're emphasizing there is that he was there for 24 years. I mean, in service. That's and his resignation came before the orders came, but they want to somehow suggest that he knew something about it and didn't want to go to Iraq. No, what happened was he wanted to run for Congress. That's what happened, and that was obviously the right decision. But 20 years as a teacher, he actually looks a little older. He's actually Harris's age and my age, born a couple of weeks before me, but he looks a bit older than that. And he was asked about that. He said, "You try working the lunch duty for 20 years and see what it does to you." He was a teacher for 20 years, a football coach. I mean, and just they're going to come up with some stuff to attack him with. And certainly he's not perfect from the left, but this also did show the power of the progressive wing. But I think it probably just happened when they met. And they met on Sunday. Shapiro and she met on Sunday. Apparently, Shapiro had some demands before he was going to be accepted. He just wanted to do it. I can't think of a better VP choice in a long time.
Yeah, I wasn't going to get into that last part of what you said, but it's actually worth hashing out a little bit more detail since you brought it up. The idea, I think, is that there was truly chemistry there, and there have been multiple sources that attribute this that they met in person, and it was obvious. I came up with like four key things that I heard or saw in different sources. That it was his character, integrity, judgment. That they know he'll support her in public and have candor in private. Also that he's personable, a sense of humor. Also that he's approachable and plain spoken. And finally, there was just this perception that they were genuinely complimentary. And then you start to dig under the surface. Well, what does he bring, right? Like you said, he was 12 years in the House, so he's got legislative experience. He was tight with Nancy Pelosi, so he's kind of in that leadership circle in the House already. 2 terms of the governor, highly successful. I'm about to give you a quote on that one. High school teacher, like you said, social studies, football coach, took a winless team to the state championship in just a turnaround time of, I think, 3 years. Chair of the Democratic Governors Association, so he's got a network across the country in terms of half the states at the governor's level. Of course, not for people that don't know, a sergeant major in the National Guard, that means that you've got like an arm full of bars of your experience. It's a non-commissioned officer. That means that there's been, basically a generation or two of soldiers that have gone through with him. So he's got all that bona fides that you would expect somebody who is actually genuine leadership, genuine experience, and so I think Harris made the decision that he's competent and effective. He's got these intangibles style-wise, and he's authentic. This Midwest charm really, it doesn't quit. So that would transcend just any specific state like Pennsylvania. Really, is the entirety of certainly Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, but also just generally speaking, rural. He's got those rural connections as a gun owner and a hunter. But I want to give a quote from Obama because I think that this is really telling about his accomplishments for folks who don't know. And apologies for reading here, but there's a lot here. So he said, this is from President Obama, former President Obama. He said, he quoted from the newspaper, the North Star State. Democrats codified under his leadership as governor, where it's a near 50-50 split legislature with just 1 vote difference. Democrats codified abortion rights, paid family and medical leave, sick leave, transgender rights protections, driver's licenses for undocumented residents, restoration of voting rights for people when they're released from prison or jail, wider voting access, one-time rebates, a tax credit aimed at low-income parents with kids, and $1 billion investment in affordable housing, including rental assistance. But wait, there's more. Also adopted were background checks for private gun transfers and a red flag warning system to take guns from people deemed by a judge to be a threat to themselves or others. Banned conversion therapy for LGBTQ people, legalized recreational marijuana, expanded education funding, required a carbon-free electric grid by 2040, adopted a new reading curricula based on phonics, passed a massive $2.58 billion capital construction package, and at the insistence of Republicans, a $300 million infusion of money for nursing homes. So this is a laundry list of what are truly considered progressive accomplishments, but it was in a bipartisan way, and it was widely respected across the state because he approached it using his own unique style, which I think will bode well for his candidacy and the Kamala Harris's run for office.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
So for all the reasons Dave brought in the last segment, it is possible that this is the most progressive ticket since McGovern. Now, we don't want to make too many comparisons with McGovern because he was crushed in probably one of the most, actually, I think it was the second most lopsided election in history. He only took Massachusetts, didn't even take his own state of South Dakota, and I think he took the DC and for about like 16 or 17 electoral college votes. That was a disaster. But one of the disasters of McGovern is that the Senator Eagleton fiasco. He had a senator that really shouldn't have nominated and had, a vice presidential candidate that he really shouldn't have nominated and had to go back on it right away. And it just was, it didn't work out well. It's more kind of like Vance and all the rumors that Trump may dump Vance. I think it's a little late at this point, so you have this ticket, and you have a ticket that can't be attacked the way Hillary Clinton's ticket was. She showed her elitism, and and her husband had a history of what are referred to by the left as neoliberal economic policies, and in some ways, the Trump was able to attack her from the left. They're not going to be able to do this with Harris. And you've got, granted, this is history, but it's amazing that it took, what is that now, almost 50 years to have another truly, because I do consider Harris to be progressive, not as progressive as I would like her to be, but nobody who's as progressive as I would like them to be has a chance of becoming president. I'm just resigned to that in the next 100 years, maybe then. But so I don't know. Do you agree with my assessment that this is the most progressive Democratic Party ticket in that time frame?
So a qualified agreement, and I'll tell you, I'll just give a brief intro, and then I'll tell you kind of an observation that I heard that makes it puts it in context in terms of perspective, right? In terms of what prism are we looking at this through? So I do think that this ticket, just to describe it, again, 30,000 foot view, there's like pragmatic aspiration because both the Biden White House and Walz's State House have accomplishments, a list of accomplishments that they can point to, but there's aspirations to carry that forward. So they are accomplished, but they're also being heavily vilified as being leftist.
Right.
And so what that leads me to is that there's an opportunity here to exhibit transformative leadership. I think that's what we made clear in the last segment. You gave great context about McGovern. There's just people looking back have said that that the country itself was a hard left environment, and that he was a response to that. And people have said that I didn't know this, but I was digging into it, and I found out that people were saying, I guess Eagleton himself, the vice presidential candidate there for a while, said that McGovern really supported abortion, amnesty, and the legalization of pot, and then that got transformed as a put down to acid, amnesty, and abortion. So there is this projection aspect of when somebody represents progressives that they're going to be vilified. But here's my
the interesting thing is that Walz accomplished those three things pretty much right in his own state. So that's kind of funny.
Well, I don't know about the amnesty part, but
Right, yeah, no, there
yeah,
was no draft.
but still,
But
yeah, but point taken, right? Like he has accomplished a track record of our, more than arguably progressive values within policy. It's actually evidence. It's a pretty long list, like I just read. But here's the context piece. We're talking about from where we are sitting, how far to the left do they really look? Right. And so Labor Secretary Robert Reich, what he does these podcasts, and there was a cartoon version recently, and I think really illustrates it well. He says that he entered politics in support of McGovern, and that he supported, certain things, like he was anti-war primarily, but there were other issues too. But then over the last, whatever that works out to, 50 years, the party has shifted farther. That Overton window, which is the topics that are that you talk about in polite society, that has shifted. So as it's shifted further and further and right, Republican Party has also shifted further and further right over those years. And so that left basically what was a Democratic centrist is now pretty far to the right compared to somebody like a Walz, like a Governor Walz. He now looks pretty, he's not quite the squad or that whole lane of dyed in the wool, so to speak, progressives. But so is this a far left ticket? I would say no. It's definitely not a far left ticket because of how grounded in centrism it really truly is from Kamala Harris and the Biden administration and her track record. She's flirted with the left, but she's never truly embraced it. And so I think Walz actually serves that purpose of reconnecting the coalition of the base that have the most enthusiasm, and so it will pull the aspiration to the left, but I think the efficiency and the potential for real accomplishment, a transformative leadership is there.
Well, as somebody who, when I was younger, was involved in what are called socialist politics, first kind of radical Trotskyist stuff in high school, then later more DSA kind of social democracy along the lines of Bernie Sanders, maybe a little bit to the left of him. But we were always struggling with this concept. How do you sell the concept of socialism in America? We were like, do we call it something else? Tom Hayden came up with economic democracy. There were always, it was always a question of that. And, again, Walz just out of the blue says, well, what you call socialism, I call neighborliness. I mean, it's just so he can actually sell the politics, but they're not labeled as such, because the fact of the matter is most people, when they actually hear about certain left-wing programs, like them, like the ideas, they just don't want to associate them with the Soviet Union or even Bernie at this point, right? Some of them. So it's about the communication of it, but those ideas are the very kind of things that are needed to bring what we referred to as the white working class back into the fold. They were a part of the Democratic base for the longest time, and then they started to lose it right around when Clinton was starting to go into what is referred to as globalization in terms of his politics. So he has a way of being able to communicate this. And so I think they can sell this again and draw enough of the union vote and enough of the quote unquote white working class vote, which is a natural ally of the progressive constituency, but for the cultural aspects. But he's even managed to sell that, like the way he said, none of your business, as framing abortion rights as individual freedom. That's what we've needed to do. You can't get more private and individual rights than that. I mean, in terms of conservative values, it's just, so he basically says things in I'll say conservative, quote unquote, way to sell it. And I think he'll sell the campaign that way. And he's already doing that. So yeah, it is progressive, but unfortunately, political reality makes it hard for presidents to be progressive. Biden tried it, but he had resistance from within his own party. Although it's kind of interesting because Manchin actually supports him as well. He got a lot of mainstream support, but Nancy Pelosi. I don't think everybody was happy with that. I think a lot of people just really wanted Shapiro or Kelly. But anyway, I mean, so yes, it is, but it isn't. It's almost like it's, in practical terms, left wing, but in cultural terms, centrist or even center right. I mean, because he talks that way. As to quote Chuck Todd, he speaks American.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like you've got there are cultural issues, but also social issues, and they kind of differ, even though the Venn diagram overlaps a little bit. So the criticism from the right, obviously, we heard just voices already coming out that this is a far left vice president for a far left, picked by a far left vice president. I mean, realistically, how much did Kamala Harris do to get the label of far left? I don't think the Biden administration qualifies there. There are some people that don't like, student loan debt relief. There are some people that didn't like the all that spending that happened in response to COVID, the stimulus, the reformation of the what it was called the anti inflation bill, but in reality there was a lot of environmental green energy spending there. So there's there's things for the right to disagree with, but when you frame it from the perspective of, well, we're defending the country from a global pandemic that could have caused a Great Depression or worse, that then it's an investment. When you're talking about climate change and the impact on the world, well, that's an investment. When child tax credit is an investment in families.
Yeah.
So really, if you frame all these different issues, you can frame them from a way where you're investing in families, you're investing in communities, and that people want to believe. If you hear the negative ads, the negative campaigning, that it's easy to get sucked into the more tribal hyperbole or antagonism. Like, for example, on the issue of Israel, where you and I aren't going to get into this right now, but the situation in Israel and Palestine, that's been going on for decades. And there's lots of differences of opinion, lots of lack of leadership. But I expect that, there's been a study put forward by the State Department that said, the United States is in real trouble in terms of public opinion around the world unless we take advantage of what we have to the benefits of our contributions to world stability. And they explicitly identified Kamala Harris as the vice president, as somebody who could step up and say, we are partners in peace. We are going to be at the table investing in the next plan to restore that area, make it whole again, and have a vision for the future. That's our role. Right now, it's really hard to talk about the reality on the ground. But I'm saying that's just one example, that there's going to be strong criticism from the right, but exhibiting leadership really can step up and redefine, take these battleground states and really kind of run away with the middle, run away with the undecided, and maybe even persuade people from the sidelines to step up and vote for a different vision. And so that, to me, that impact on the electoral map can't be overstated.
I mean, the Republicans are going to have to focus on a line of attack. Now, they've had the economy and the border. The problem is both of those situations are improving as we speak. So it's just, and if they hit too hard on the border, sooner or later, I don't know why the Democrats haven't done this yet, but sooner or later they're going to say, you had your bill. It was draconian. It was everything you wanted, but you didn't pass it because you've got a leader who of your party who just doesn't care about the country, right? I mean, they'll frame that. And the economy, I mean, despite this last glitch of the jobs report, is actually almost exactly what the Fed has been trying to accomplish for the past year and a half, is almost guaranteed that there'll be a rate reduction in September. So the unemployment rate will stay low. There'll probably be a recovery of jobs, possibly, but interest rates will go down, and therefore credit will become available. I mean, it's so. It's kind of coming together. We'll see what actually happens. Things could happen to the economy that we don't even predict. But it's looking like the economy is going to be at worst not that bad, and at best in pretty good shape, that people aren't even thinking about it as much anymore. Come November, come September, possibly even. So so those are the points of attack that the Republicans have. If they don't have those two things, what else do they have? Transgenderism, if they want to do that, but they're not going to expand their base on that. They've got, again, this ridiculous Swift boat thing, and they are in a panic. They don't know what to do. They don't have a coordinated attack right now.
Yeah. So this is, I think you raise a lot of interesting points and valid points. Just to expound a little bit on, what the attack might be. That I did already see some, Republican criticism of Walz as governor. Well, it was very in response to COVID, basically, and so it was very difficult time for this country. I'm sure everybody remembers. I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but when in the unknowns that surrounded the public health threat, the threats to the stability of the medical system, and also the impact on education and how students could have been vectors to really spread broadly and widely across, their parents and their grandparents and their, it really, there was a lot of unknowns. Governors had to act with the best information that they had. Are there criticisms in the rearview mirror? Yes. Do some people overreact in theory? Possibly, but that's not going to be enough to take Walz
No.
off of his game. He's going to be able to justify the decisions that he made because all the governors did that, including Ron DeSantis in Florida. I mean, I say all, like nearly all. So that line of attack isn't going to be great. And then what do you contrast that with? Well, Walz explicitly called out yesterday Project 2025, and he's basically saying Trump's playing dumb. He knows exactly what's in there, in part, as you and I know, because there was a Project 2017 that was out there when Trump won in 2016, and Trump passed, depending on how you look at the numbers, over 90, close to 95% of everything that was in that plan, he passed. So it's not like he doesn't know the Heritage Foundation or what their designs are. He put those people in his government. And in fact, they've got broader aspirations now. Lots of people are pointing this out. It's not me. It's in the document. You can read it yourself. Also, Vance wrote the foreword of 2025. So it's not like he doesn't know what's in there. So the contrast couldn't be more stark. And I think that that's why they look so progressive. That's why they look so far to the left. It's compared to what? It's compared to society writ large and compared to the competition.
Yeah, but we'll be talking about this a lot more. But he's also being attacked for not calling in the National Guard immediately with the rioting. But again, that's not going to fly. They're going to have to come up with something else. Maybe they will, but they're not showing it now. Right now, the responses are kind of unhinged. Our final topic tonight, there were some primaries yesterday. We're getting towards the end of the primary season. I mean, I don't know why the states hold primaries as late as August anymore during presidential years. But the key one for us to discuss, although there's some other news as well, is in Missouri, the state of Missouri. Cori Bush, one of the squad members, we've discussed her on this show before, lost her bid to re-election to a moderate who had been considering a run for a statewide position and then turned around and ran against her. Of course, she took very strong stands. She actually did condemn the Hamas attack. It was quicker to do it than others in the squad, but she was apparently at least according to AIPAC, who put what is it, something like $9 million in, and then a bunch of other money had been spent, dark money had been spent against her, to be very critical of Israel after that, of Israel's response, and pointing out the deaths and all that. They were using quotes from other squad members against her, the Benjamins and comment and other types of things that do fit into anti-Semitic tropes, but she never said anything like that. I think that there is going to be a lot of the AIPAC wants to take credit for it. I don't know that money makes all that big a difference in campaigns anymore. It used to be needed to pay for television advertisements, which were expensive. But most of the campaigns are run on social media campaigns, which is not that expensive. So I don't know that the money itself made the whole difference, but the fact that AIPAC was hitting her and basically able to paint her as a radical, that promote a guy who's not unprogressive, just not quite as left as her. Is the squad in trouble? Is our left-wing politics in trouble? And we had the success with the vice president and a few other areas, but this is the second squad member to lose a primary in the season. And there's going to be a lot of discussions about what this means about the left. Does the left need to kind of change how it approaches things, how it talks about things, that maybe not exist in so much of a cultural bubble? But she wasn't the most extreme of the progressives on that, and yet she still paid the price. Dave?
Yeah, thank you for that setup. I do think this was by far the most interesting race yesterday across the states that had elections: Missouri, Michigan, Washington, and Kansas. I'm perfectly fine if we spend almost all the time on this one because, like you said, there's second order and third order things to think about. So this is the first district in Missouri, which is the city of St. Louis, and then also the surrounding county. It doesn't go unnoticed that Cori Bush was also, like you said, the second member of the squad who lost her renomination. And moreover, that she it's not just that she's progressive. It's also that there were legitimate criticisms, because we're not talking about, Republican versus Democrat here. We're talking about somebody who's also a Democrat, who's also progressive, who's also, popular and had, just needed to make marginal differentiation between the two. And there were issues that existed that were enough. And then when you compound that with the spending, the extreme spending, which I think that's worth talking about in and of itself. Like, I'll put the spending aside for a minute. Just for, really what the spending does is it amplifies. Like I said, you're able to highlight, you make the case, hey, what are the things that you should second guess about my opponent? So maybe AIPAC had a specific agenda related to her position on Israel, maybe, and the region in general, or just broadly being a squad member. But she was just one of only 6 Democrats that voted against Joe Biden's infrastructure bill. And, that's arguably grounds for criticism. Also, the Department of Justice is investigating her because of her campaign money that was spent on a supposedly extraordinary amount of money. I don't know if that's true, on her private security detail. And then she ended up marrying one of those people who benefited from it. Again, that might just be, red meat for politics and not relevant, but it's at least something you could point out, like, hey, she's getting investigated. So it's something to amplify. And, I'll defer to you. Sorry, I'll hand it back to you in a second, and we could talk about the money. But the idea is that the Ferguson protests were a big deal, and so she did take leadership and in that time period, speaking for people, representing her community well. She was extremely popular. But there is criticism of her that she didn't really check in with the constituents enough. So that, generally speaking, for people, not just squad members, not just progressives, but if you're seen as out of touch or not closely enough, checking in with your constituents, then there's grounds for criticism. So you combine all that. It was a pretty close race, and
Yeah.
she was on the wrong side of it. But it's big because she's a squad member.
I mean, she probably will come back in 2 years. She's already said she's been radicalized. Not a good term to use when you've just been lost partly on your rhetoric, but okay. And she intends to go against AIPAC in some fashion. But she'll be back in 2 years. That's and she may even be able to win it in 2 years unless her opponent really plays his cards right. He's I mean, this is again a very progressive. It takes up a good part of St. Louis and some of the suburbs of St. Louis. It's a progressive area. There's no Republican challenger that's going to defeat either of them. This is a safe Democratic seat. But again, this is I think a lesson that maybe the left can learn from Walz is we need to frame it. We need to give up some of our rhetoric, even if we're emotionally attached to it or we think it's got such deep meaning. I mean, in the 1960s, there were radicals who say you can't talk about imperialism without saying imperialism. Well, actually, yeah, you can. In fact, it's pretty easy. You don't have to use a politically charged term. If you can explain yourself in a better way, particularly when you're trying to reach people outside of your cultural milieu. And a politician has to do that. A politician has to remember that she represents everybody in the district, not just the people who fit her framework of representation. You need to know that if there is a disconnect, as she said, how am I going to close the gap? How am I going to reconnect? And again, I think if she emphasizes AIPAC too much, that's going to work against her. She needs to figure out how she is going to connect and win based on a positive program to sell herself as to why she best represents the district. It was 51 to 46%. I mean, really close. It could have gone the other way with even the slightest of issues. But she had a hard time in a recent interview referring to Hamas as a terrorist organization. So she had some smart ass comment about, well, some of us black activists were called terrorists. No, you don't do that. Hamas murdered people. They are a terrorist organization. Don't be afraid to say that. It doesn't mean you don't support the Palestinian people. It doesn't mean that you're endorsing anything about what Israel is saying, but you gotta be ready to communicate and communicate clearly. But I think that was probably the last straw, was that interview, because she couldn't say that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And again, I'm certainly not here to speak to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but
Sure.
When you're asked, if someone puts you on the spot and you're a Congress member and you've got all the resources available to you, you see the writing on the wall, you know that an organization has dedicated $8 million to vilifying you in public. And that you're being outspent by these groups, 12 million to 3 million, and you've only raised another 3 million on your own, and your opposition, who's a well-liked community member, has got 5 million, and so you're just way outspent. It was like again, that's 17 to 3. You need to not shoot yourself in the foot, and you can say, I mean, I'm not a politician, but you could say things like, terrorist acts committed by organizations on the terrorist list are something that are always contemptible, and we stand in solidarity with democracies in the region. But we also stand in solidarity with people who need to have their rights and their future addressed, and it's a priority of mine to be part of that. Something like that. I mean, I just made that up, but like that's the kind of thing that if you were not trying to be if you were more aspirational than confrontational. But again, I'm not a politician, so I'm not going to tell people what to say. But the truth is that when you've got millions of dollars being coordinated to point out all your flaws, you can't give them more ammunition, a new flaw. and again, this is hindsight, and I guess I want to point this out too, Eric. You said it was about a 7% differential. I looked it up. I think it was like 7,000 votes. So that means if you
a 5% differential.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah. Sorry, 5% differential was about 7,000 votes in this area. Again, city of St. Louis and the county surrounding there. That's 3,500 people. Let's go the other way, and you're doing good. So it really, it's not like she was blown out. It's just that I believe that, there was some alienation that happened. And then you look at her book too, like there are some people who maybe say, yeah, you're a nurse, you're a healer, you've dedicated your life to the community and making people better. But some of the stuff in your book may have said like, oh, and I used my emotional energy my faith to help heal people with my presence. And maybe, there are some people that think like, well, if that's how you roll and that's how you interpret your role in the world, that's okay. But I suspect there are other people who are like, it's like medicine, prayer and medicine are they're complementary. But now when you talk about like laying your hands on people and healing them, like, maybe that's not it's not a pragmatic way to, in my opinion, maybe that some people may have thought that, this is not fully something, it's just another one of those flaws, or another one, not necessarily a flaw. It's another one of those criticisms that got circulated about her. So we were talking about Cori Bush here, but you could also say the same thing similar about Jamal Bowman. Jamal Bowman had 17 million spent by AIPAC against him. He's also somebody that, there's personal potentially reasons why he lost. And I say personal, I mean highly specific. Sorry, go ahead.
He's made more inflammatory comments than she has. So that's why this was a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
My prediction, I did great last week, but my prediction was some weeks back was that Cori Bush would hold on, and that was wrong.
Yeah, so that's you anticipated what I was going to say, is that each situation is different. We went pretty far in depth into Cori Bush's situation in her district. We didn't do the same with Jamal Bowman, but publicly speaking, people are separating the money and saying, look at all that money that was spent by AIPAC, when in reality, each situation has its own nuances. That's all the only other point I was going to make, is that he's got his own target for criticism. There's a unique situation on the ground, highly popular, person in his district. He represented a smaller portion of his district. The adversary, more centrist Democrat, had a larger sort of geographic footprint, a larger natural base. So it was more predictable that Jamal Bowman that money would have a bigger impact. And so, yeah, 2 squad members were defeated, but it's not because of their progressiveness, and it's not because of their squad membership. It's about their own individual, the way that they chose to be leaders, and how their communities responded to that.
I just want to point out too that that Wesley Bell is actually not that centrist of a candidate. He will join the Progressive Caucus when he is in Congress. He's a candidate that, I mean, if I was living in that district, I would have voted for Cori Bush because of my politics and my ideology, because I want the squad to be as big as possible. But I would have been happy. I wouldn't be all that, if I was in that district, I wouldn't be all that distraught over him being in there. He does represent the values of the district. Very impressive person, former prosecutor, and in just about any other district, I'd be happy to endorse him. I'd love him here, if he were to come here. So we have to factor that in too. It wasn't just hers to lose. There was a very viable progressive candidate running against her, who, when we say centrist, we're talking very relatively closer to the center than she was, but probably still on the left end of the party.
I think, in our closing minute or two, I'll just mention that, in Michigan, there was another big Senate race, and Representative Slotkin, very popular Democrat, she won the nomination handily. There was an open seat for Senator Stabeno's seat, right, basically because she retired, and so that was up for grabs. The money is in behind her. Everyone knows that Michigan is a critical battleground state. So there was already like 24 million raised by Representative Stabenow compared to less than 3 million. Representative Slotkin compared to the competition, who only raised about 3 million. And in fact, she's already Representative Slotkin's already started doing ad buys for October and November leading up to the general. Because so this one, everybody knew what was going to happen, but it's just something worth recognizing that there's a lot of money up for grabs in these, going to be spent in these battleground states.
Her opponent is backed by Trump, by the way, and also won yesterday. But I believe most of the odds and pundits are giving her like a 66% chance of winning the race. Doesn't seem like the Republicans will pick one up there.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
All right, this brings us to predictions. Dave.
I'm going to keep it real simple. So this vice presidential ticket has really enhanced the likelihood that Vice President Harris's campaign really takes off. Governor Wells is from Minnesota, which has a tradition of populism and progressivism. It's the state where Senator Wellstone came from, notably campaign finance reform, the Wellstone Amendment, which was overturned by Citizens United, which gives a topic, it gives an issue that they could potentially champion, pick up where Senator Wellstone left off. It's that folksy vision of government that remembers the importance of focusing on working class people and middle class America. I think Governor Walz really does follow in Senator Wellstone's footsteps, embodying his values. He's also articulate. He's a dynamic messenger. I think he makes a solid complement to Vice President Harris as her running mate. And so it turns out that just 2 weeks ago, I said I thought that there would be draw to even. Harris would draw to even before the appointment by heading into September, based on the convention and the appointment of the vice presidential candidate. Turns out it's already even money. So my prediction is that this momentum is going to continue to spread in coming weeks, and we're going to see polls shifting across battleground states like they have nationally, and those overall odds are going to fully reverse within right after these debates if they happen, and leading right into the end September, beginning of October. We're going to see a really big shift, I think, in these battleground states.
I'm going to go one step further. We haven't even had the Democratic Party convention yet. You get a bump from that, right? I mean, it's so. I'm going to state that, I mean, unless there's something major that happens to change the trajectory, that Harris will be the first Black female president. And another little bit of history there that we didn't mention before. I think this is like the first governor that has been on the Democratic ticket in decades, for a long time. Anyway, it's going to be very interesting. But my prediction is I'm calling her as the winner at this point, based on intangibles as well as the polls. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.